Kadosh Baruch Hu created us with two drives, two impulses, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. Chazal darshan b'chol levovecha. It really should have said b'chol libcha. We're supposed to love Hashem b'chol levovecha. Why the two bets? To indicate to us that we have two hearts, two drives in the heart. The drive, which is the Yetzer Tov, what's called the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Question is, how is a person supposed to serve Hashem with the Yetzer Hara, with his evil drive? What does that mean? That's the question I want to examine tonight. Esav, is connected with the Yetzer Hara. Esav is the Yetzer Hara, Yaakov is the Yetzer Tov. But we're going to see it's not quite as simple as that. It says in the Pasuk, if we look at note number 1, V'yahav Yitzchak es Esav, and Yitzchak loved Esav, ki tzayid b'fiv, because literally trapping was in his mouth. V'Rivka oheves es Yaakov, and Rivka loved Yaakov. So Rashi explains, look at the next Rashi, b'fiv, kitar gumo, b'fiv shal Yitzchak, that he used his, let's just finish off, umidrasha, the exegetical understanding of that is b'piv shel Esav, sheyatzad oisoi, that Esav would trap with his mouth. He would lead astray Yitzchak with his mouth. Tzad, but tzado, so he would trap him. U mirimeu b'devorov, and fool him with his words. Now the Arizal explains that tzayid b'fiv, this expression, trapping with his mouth, who say that, of course, according to this, saw two pshatim in Rashi, one says it's talking about Yitzchak's mouth, but according to those who understand that the tzayid b'fiv was the mouth of Esav, was talking that this is referring to Rabbi Akiva. That Yitzchak sensed Torah Shebal Peh. In the mouth of Esav, Yitzchak sensed, he felt the Torah Shebal Peh. And indeed, Rabbi Akiva, Kula Aliba de Rabbi Akiva, everything goes according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, who was the great Mechadesh, the great fount, the stream from which all the Torah Shebal Peh that we have today came from, he was descended from converts from Esav, from Esau, from the nation of Esav. So Rabbi Akiva, through which all Torah Shebal Peh comes from Esav. And that was the reach, that was the reich, the Arizal, that the aroma of the Torah Shebal Peh that Yaakov Avinu sensed in the mouth of Esav. How do we understand that? What's Esav's connection to the Torah Shebal Peh? And does the fact that Rabbi Akiva comes from Esav mean anything significant afterwards? After all, we know that somebody who converts is lower than like a katan canola dummy. He's like a new child. So exactly what is the point of the connection of Rabbi Akiva to Esav, and what's that got to do with Torah Shebal Peh, the written Torah, through, as which I said, all of the Torah Shebal Peh that we have comes through him. We understand, it's Mishnah Maseches Avos, look at number 7. Shimon HaTzadik Haya Mishari Knesset HaGedola. Shimon HaTzadik was from the remainders, from the remnant of the Knesset HaGedola, Great Assembly. Hu used to say, Al Shalosh Dvarim HaOlam Omed, on three things the world stands. Al Torah, Al Avoda, Al Gemilas Chasodim. On Torah, on learning of the Torah, Avoda meant at one point the Korbanos, Ba'avotenu Al Rabim, through our great sins. We lost the Beis HaMikdash, and now the Avoda we have in our hands now is the Avoda Shebelev, which is Tefillah, davening, prayer. Val Gemilas Chasodim. And if you look at the number 8, these 3 pillars of the world are represented by the 3 pillars, the 3 avos. It says over the Altalas, Klinin Alma Miskayim, Ala Torah, do Yaakov. Torah is Yaakov. And Al Avoda, de Torah Shebal Peh. I'm pointing this out because specifically it mentions Torah Shebal Peh. That's Avram Avinu. As we learned in previous weeks, Avram Avinu was the pillar of kindness, the tent open to the 4 corners of the world. Dava Acher, another interpretation of Avoda, does Yitzchak. That's Yitzchak. Where does Esav stand in this system? Does he stand completely outside it? Let's have a look. As we know, Rashi tells us that even in the womb, Esav was drawn to Avodah Zarah, to idolatry. And Yaakov was drawn to the houses of study, of Torah study, of Shem and Eva. That's, if you look at number 9, that's the Rashi. It says that there was a Lashon Ritza in the Pasuk Kashahaya Overes, that when Rivka would pass by the Pischei Torah Shel Shem Va'eva, she would pass by the yeshiva of Shem Va'eva. So Ratz, Yaakov would, so to speak, run inside her. He would mefarches, he would struggle, the taste to get out. When she would overes hapischei avodah zarah, when she would walk past a place of avodah zarah, a temple of avodah zarah, so then Esav mefarcheses, let's say, Esav would struggle to get out. So seemingly, on the surface, these are 2 polar opposites. Except, there's something very interesting, that Esav is called by the Gemara Yisrael Muma. Now this is interesting for 2 reasons. What is the connection to Yisrael? Isn't Esav something completely separate? And number 2, why the name Yisrael? Yisrael, remember, is always the higher name of Yaakov. Yaakov was renamed by Hashem as Esav because he was Kisarisa, that you struggle with God and man. And Hashem renamed him. So what's that name? How does that name come to be associated with Esav? Yisrael Muma. Muma means rebellious. But he's a Yisrael who rebelled. The very name of Yisrael, as we said, if you look at number 11, that was the pasuk I was quoting, V'yomer Lo Yaakov Yoma Od. You won't be called Yaakov anymore. Shimcho, your name. Ki Yisrael, you're going to be called Yisrael. Ki Sarisa im Elokim v'manashim v'tuchal. That you have, so to speak, you've struggled, you've wrestled with God and man, and you've overcome. Tuchal. You've overpowered. That strong power that Esav, that the name Yisrael, connotes, somehow is connected to Esav. Yitzchak's mistake of Esav was really not something simple. The fact that Esav is called Yisrael Muma means that at some point he was Yisrael. He was part of the concept of what Yisrael is. In other words, until he grew up, Esav had indeed overcome his lowly nature. He dominated that. And Yitzchak saw that at least at one point in time, Esav had passed this test. What Yitzchak didn't see, that ultimately Esav had lost this fight and become a Yisrael Muma. But a Yisrael he started off. Ki sarisa v'tuchal. He was able to conquer at some point that Yetzer Hara, which was of his own, because he also overcame his angel, the angel of Esav. That's what it means, Elokim. In the end, it's true, Yaakov followed his nature and Esav followed his. And once Esav had left this tafkid, and we'll understand this as we go on, B'ezrat Hashem, he represented the Yetzer Hara itself. But at a certain point, and this again was the mistake that Yitzchak made, Esav was a Yisrael. Even though he was Israel, he became a Yisrael Muma. Let's try and understand. Now, this is a key Gemara that I want to examine tonight, which is going to be really the essence of our discussion. Look at number 13. If you want to take some notes, Bakasha. We have more, I think. We're looking at number 13. This is a Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Samach Esamud Beis. Rav Sheshes, the great Amora. Rav Sheshes called Tlosin Yomim. Every 30 days, Mahadale Talmudei, he would review his learning. V'toli v'kai be'ebira, and he would literally lean on the doorpost, ve'ira dadasha, v'ama chadai nafshoi, rejoice my soul. Chadai nafshoi, rejoice my soul. Lach karei, lach tanoi, it is for you, for myself, that karoi I learnt. That's talking about Torah Shebiksav. And lach tanoi, and for you I've learnt Torah Shabal Peh. The Gemara says, Eini, can that be that Rav Sheshes did it all for himself? It was totally selfish, just for myself. Chadai nafshoi, rejoice myself. Chadai nafshoi, lach karai, for you I learnt. Lach tanoi, for you I learnt. I'm a Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, Ilmele Torah, were it not for the Torah, lo niskaimu shamayim va'aretz. Heavens and earth would not exist. Shenema, because it says in the Pasuk, Im lo barisi yomam v'loila, were it not for my bris, my covenant of day and night. What is the covenant of day and night? The Torah, which is learnt day and night. Were it not for that covenant, chukas shamayim v'aretz lo samti, I would never have instituted, I'd never have placed the laws of the natural world, the physical world. There wouldn't be no world were it not for the fact. So how can we understand that for you, says Rav Yeshes, for myself, lach karai, lach tanai, surely the Torah is the kiyum of the whole world. That person learns Torah because that is the essence of existence. So on the surface of this, it seems an extremely selfish concept. I learned Torah for myself. For you, I learned Torah. And so the Gemara challenges, and they said, how can that be? Surely Rav Sheshes learned Torah because the entire world depends upon Torah. The whole world was created with one reason and one reason only, so the Torah should be learnt. The Gemara gives the following Torah. It's Ki ovid inish, when a person acts, when he does anything, adaita denashi ka ovid, he does it for himself. So what does all this mean? How does one understand this? The Gemara is saying one's first inspiration must and does come from inspiration, from the selfish input, from, as we would call it, the Yetzer Hara. That's where everything starts. Mikara al-liba de inish, from the beginning, Mikara ki ovid inish adaita de nofish ka ovid. A person acts, and he acts for himself. Let's explain this. Let's understand this. The beginning of life is the Yetzer Hara. There's a machlokus in the Gemara, at which point does the Yetzer Hara enter a person? But basically everybody agrees, that maskana of the Gemara is that a person's Yetzer Hara enters the body during birth. And his Yetzer Tov only comes with maturity. That's why there's no penalty for a person is not mechuyev in mitzvahs till he's 13, a boy, a girl till she's 12, and there's no punishment until a person gets to 20. Everything the Yetzer Hara does is for itself, and it encourages a person to do things for his own pleasure. And we're trying to explain now, we're trying to understand how it is that Rav Sheshes could say that lach Tanai lach karai, I learned for you, for myself, for talking to himself. I learned for myself. Let's try and understand this. To better understand how the Yetzer Hara, that Eisov came to represent, and his connection to Rabbi Akiva, is to understand the force behind it. Avram, as we've said, is the attribute of hesed, the attribute, the third pillar of the world of kindness. the positive influence on all creation. Yitzchak's attribute is the midas hadin, the attribute of strict justice. Strict justice. And that midah dictates that a person gets exactly what he deserves, no less and no more. Din. It's interesting to note that when the angel, the Malach, came to tell Abraham that Yitzchak would be born, he came together with another angel, two other angels, but one of those we're not going to deal with tonight. But one of the other angels he came was with the angel who was charged with destroying Sodom, overturning Sodom. There's no coincidence. These angels didn't have to come together, they could have come separately. They were performing seemingly separate tasks. What is the Torah teaching us? That they came together? The angel that announces the birth of Yitzchak and the angel that comes to overturn Sodom. Sodom we think of as an irredeemably evil place. But one has to understand the mistake, the philosophy which was at the base of their mistake and their evil. Sodom was a society entirely based on din, on you get what you want, you get what you deserve, no less and no more. Strict justice. There's a contradiction between two Maimarei Chazal, two statements of Chazal. One Chazal says, Olam Chesed Yabone, that the world will be built on kindness. And the other Chazal says that in the beginning, Olam Achshavto, that Hashem thought, right? Batchala, in the beginning, Hashem thought Livrosa Olam B'din, to create the world with din, and he saw that it wouldn't be miskaim. The world could not exist through strict din. Why? Because as soon as somebody put one foot out of line, he'd be zapped by a lightning. It's not possible to live like that. Hashem wanted to create the world with din. He saw Shalom and Lord Miskaim, so he literally got up from the throne of din, mystical concept, and he sat on the throne of Rachamim, mercy. And that's the world we live in now, where there is din, but there's a stay of justice, that Hashem will give us time and many aspects of Rachamim which don't contradict din, but they mollify, they qualify din. But again, we've got this seeming contradiction. Olam ha'machshavto levroses olam badin. Olam ha'machshavto sounds like Olam ha'machshavto at the beginning. Hashem's kaviyachol, Hashem's thought, his original thought was to create the world with din. What does it mean then? Olam chesed yaboned, the world will be built on chesed. How can we combine these two ideas? How can we make them make sense? So the answer is that, of course, the world, the beginning of everything, is chesed. Chesed, the concept of chesed is hishpashtus, is to go out. Hashem created the world with one reason and one reason only, which is to do good to another, meaning to us, to mankind, to create an entity to whom he could do good to. Chesed is the beginning of everything. But chesed, which is given as a free handout, as the Mesilas Yesharim points out, is not the best chesed that can be. Because a chesed which is given as a free handout, a person doesn't feel that good about it. There's a problem called nehamat kisufa, it's Aramaic for the bread of shame. The bread of shame is the feeling when a pauper, I'm not talking about a professional, I'm talking about a real pauper, puts his hand out to you and he doesn't want to look in your face when you give him a handout. A chesed which is given as a free handout is not the best kind of chesed because the recipient feels he doesn't really own it. It's being given to me. This is not really mine. It's really somebody else's which I'm benefiting from. And therefore Hashem created a system of din to make the chesed the best chesed. To make the kindness the best kindness. When a person works for something, he possesses it. It's mine. I worked for this. Therefore, and please stop me if I'm not being clear. Therefore, din is not a virtue of value in itself. Din always has to be justice, judgment. What you get is what you deserve. This whole process is a subset of chesed. It's to make the chesed the best chesed that can be. This is where Sodom went wrong. Sodom perceived din as a a virtue in itself, independent of chesed. And and therefore that's why they forbade kindness. Because they understood this destroys the whole world. Because why? Because you're not allowing a person to earn what he deserves. Any kind of kindness, and this is why it was a very cruel society, but it wasn't cruelty for the sake of vindictiveness. It was a cruelty based on a totally misguided and misapprehension of what the nature of the world is. This world is not created for din. If you're living in a world which is completely created for din, what you get is what you deserve, this and no more, then clearly if you believe that's the overarching principle for which the world is created, then chesed is a perversion of this. How can you do chesed? How can you give people things they don't deserve? You're destroying the world. Yitzchak Avinu is the pillar of din in the world. Yitzchak's birth is announced together with the angel that comes to destroy Sodom. Let's understand that. It says, in Pasuk 19, Bereshis, Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak, Ben Avraham. Avraham holidas Yitzchak. Now, many of the commentators point out that if we just said that these are the generations of Yitzchak ben Avraham, so if Yitzchak is ben Avraham, he's the son of Avraham, then the following phrase, Avraham holidas Yitzchak, is totally redundant. If you're telling me that it's Yitzchak ben Avraham, what does that mean? Yitzchak ben Avraham means Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. You don't even tell me therefore that Avraham holidas Yitzchak. Okay, there are many perushim. But according to what we're saying tonight, this is absolutely beautiful. This is indicating exactly what we're saying. Avraham, as we said, is the pillar of chesed. Avraham is the idea of hispashtus, going out into the world, kindness. And Yitzchak is the midah of din. Avraham holidas Yitzchak. Chesed begets, chesed makes the necessity of din exist. This is the secret understanding of the pasuk. Avraham holidas Yitzchak. Avraham chesed, contained in that chesed, there's a necessity for Yitzchak, the din of Yitzchak, but not its independent. This is what this phrase is telling us. Why, if we remember the binding of Yitzchak, when Avraham Avinu was told by Hashem to bring Yitzchak up as a korban, why is it called the Akedah, the binding? What's so important that we refer to the fact that Yitzchak was bound? Why don't we call it the offering up of Yitzchak? Why is this incident known as the binding of Yitzchak? And indeed we learn that the Tomid, the daily sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash, had to be tied the hand, meaning the front leg, to the foot, the rear leg. And the Gemara says, look at this over there, in Maseches Tomid. Gemara Tana Yad V'Regel. We learned that the korban, when it's offered, has to be bound, akud, Yad V'Regel, the front foot, the front leg and the back leg, Ka'ekedes Yitzchak ben Avraham, like the binding of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. The destruction of Sodom and the birth of Yitzchak were two reflections of the same theme. Din has to be bound. Din cannot be unbound. Din has to be bound to chesed. Giving birth to Yitzchak meant that din was brought into the world, but the din has to be bound to the chesed. It's not independent. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. Chesed gives birth to din. These two angels' missions were distinct, but they were related. They were related because the overturning of Sodom comes to show us that din is not an independent virtue. And that Yitzchak is Ben Avraham. That same message. The Akedus Yitzchak means that the din has to be bound. It has to be bound to chesed. The Midas Adin is the root of the Yetzer Hara in the world. Now, this is a difficult concept, and I'll try and explain it as best I can. Chesed, the world starts off with chesed. Chesed is letovim uleroim, the good and the bad. Chesed is indiscriminate. There's no pirud, there's no separation in chesed. Chesed has no separation, has no parts, has no beginning, has no end. Din, the midas of din, is the beginning of what's called pirud, separation. It's possible with the midah of din to divide things up, to separate something from this great chesed. As I say, it's a difficult concept. There's now a possibility things can be separated, and that's the idea. The word din is connected to the word die, sufficient, enough, until here and no more. In point of fact, in the Kabbalistic sense of the blowing of the shofar, the tekiah, the long blast, that is the midah of chesed. That's the Kohen. And conceptually, that long blast is without beginning and without end, as we try and symbolize in the tekiah gadola, the one that goes on and on and on. The teruah, the da-da-da-da-da-da, that's din. Why? Because din is episodic. It's a break in that everlasting, endless chesed. And that pirud, that separation from the chesed, contains within it the possibility, ultimately, when there's a separation from that chesed, you go right the way down the line, all the way down. The possibility of this separation allows the entry of something which eventually will be ra, will be evil, by the mere fact that it's as separated from that great chesed which is without end. Okay, as I said, these are difficult concepts, but let's try and understand that the midas adin, on whatever level we can understand it, is the root of Yetzer Hara in the world. Now let's go back to Rav Sheshis. The way a person does anything is for himself. The way anything starts off, that is as we said, a baby starts off with a Yetzer Hara, pure Yetzer Hara. Can you hand that back to me? There's a note there, other one. Oh, it's not there? Okay. Maybe it's not here. Give me a second. Here we are. There's a very famous chazal which says, Rabbi Yehuda, it says this is in Pesachim. Rabbi Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, La'olam yasok adam b'Torah. A person should always involve himself with Torah, u'b'mitzvahs af al pi shelo lishma. La'olam, always, even though it's lo lishma, shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, because from the lo lishma, from the non-altruistic reasons of learning Torah, he will come to the altruistic reason to learn Torah. Now it's interesting because it says la'olam. La'olam means always. Why la'olam? Why isn't that just the beginning? The point I'm trying to bring out here is when we say that me'ikara, from the beginning, everybody does something for selfish reasons. That's the beginning. That's the Yetzer Hara. That's a baby. That's where everything starts. Ovid inish adaita denashe ka'ovid. When he becomes a bigger person, he realizes, and this is really the job of the Yetzer Tov. You see, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara are really not enemies, or at least at the beginning they weren't enemies, just as Esav wasn't an enemy. Esav's job, the Yetzer Hara of Esav, and we'll see in a second. The Yetzer Hara is the desire, is the selfish desire. The Yetzer Tov has to teach the Yetzer Hara that his ani, aliba nafshi, that his own self is not that small self that he thinks he is. Let me try and explain what I mean. Anything that brings a person simcha in the world is caused by a broadening of his view of himself, who I am. There's an interesting Gemara in Sukkah that gives a measurement. The measurement's called a tefach somayach. Tefach is a hand's breadth. A tefach somayach means happy. Now, what is a tefach somayach? It's a little bit more than a tefach. It's what we might call a maxi tefach. The question is, why did Chazal give it this rather strange name, a happy tefach? Why not call it a maxi tefach gadol? And the answer is that the tefach is still a tefach, but it's a little bit more. All happiness in a person comes from the sense of the broadening of his definition of I. I'll give you in a moment. When a person gets married, how does he define himself? It's not just me, it's me and my wife. When he has children, he sees himself as me, my family. When he has grandchildren, Avram Avinu's I was the entire world. It's true, the beginning of everything. Aliba the nafshi of it. A person does everything for himself, but who am I? That is the job of the Yetzer Tov, to educate the Yetzer Hara. You think you're this little I, you're not. That's not who you are. The older a person becomes, the more sophisticated a person becomes. If you've ever had the opportunity, the privilege of meeting an Adam Gadol, a great man, literally you understand that his concept of who his I is not just, it's all Klal Yisrael. Avraham Avinu understood the entire existence was part of his. That's who I am. A person can never destroy, and we're going to see this soon, this central point in him, which is that he does things for himself. The question is, who is himself? Who is myself? Is it the little me? Or is it my concept of myself being the entire universe, as Avraham Avinu was? We've spoken about it in previous weeks. The word in Hebrew, katan, meaning small, or a minor, is connected to the word kat. Same word in English, katua. Why? Because somebody who's immature has no perception of anything further than the end of his nose. You give a baby a popsicle, he's the happiest thing in the world. Take it away, the world just came to an end. There's no consistency, there's no continuity. He's cut. It's this moment, it's this moment, it's this moment. Gadol, the word gadol, great, is related to the epithet that Yaakov Avinu applied to the tribe of Gad. Gad, Gudud, Yugudenu. Gad is a marching troop. The whole concept of a marching troop is that which goes forward. It's not stuck in this moment. It's connected. This moment is connected to this moment. My sense of my ego is connected to my family, the whole world. The job of the Yetzer Tov is to teach the Yetzer Hara. You're not that little I. True, everything starts la'olam. A person should do Torah mitzvahs. La'olam, always. Why? Because he'll never escape that me'ikara aliba danashe. From the beginning, a person does things for himself. And that's what Rav Sheshes was saying. Rav Sheshes, the great Amoira, he wasn't being selfish in the sense that we think of it by saying, karai nafshi, be happy, chadai nafshi, karai lach, I learned for you. Tanai lach, I learned Torah Shabbat Peh for you. This is not selfishness, because that's why the Gemara goes on to ask, hang on a second, isn't the world, imlo brisi yomam v'layla, chukas shemaim lo samti? Didn't we say that the whole world, the Torah was created, and because the world was created, so the whole world exists? That's what the Torah is for. The kiyum of the whole world. The answer is yes, that's true. The kiyum of the whole world, and I have to teach myself that my I encompasses the entire world. That is an Adam Gadol. That is Avraham Avinu. Eila Toldot Shemayim va'aretz. These are the generations of Shemayim va'aretz. Behibaram. Behibaram, in their creation, rearrange those letters, Behibaram, and you can rearrange the same letters will come out as Be-Avraham, for Avraham. Avram Avinu's ego, as to use the modern psychological word, encompassed the entire world. That is the job of the Yetzer Tov. The word, as we said before, din, is connected to die, which means enough. The Yetzer Hara left to himself says, die, this is who you are, it's enough, no more than that, die. The Yetzer Hara says, no, not die, look beyond the end of your fingertips and see that who you really are, you're your family, you're the world. And that only comes when a person becomes wise, when he broadens his perspective, when he becomes a gadol, when he becomes 12, 13, 20, when he reaches a greater age. And hopefully, the more he learns, the more he understands this concept. As we said in the beginning, what does it mean? Can we talk about Chazal say, with both your yetzes? Now we understand. A person needs both of these things. A person doesn't have a yetzer hara, he will have no desire to do anything. And we're going to come to this in a second. But if it stays at that, just yetzer hara, then he can't serve Hashem, because he'll be trapped in the confining prison of his own ego. And that's the reason why the two twins, Esav and Yaakov, Esav is born first. The Yetzer Hara comes first. That's the beginning of all action, the beginning of all motivation, the beginning of all desire. He's the Bechor, he's the firstborn. But without the Yaakov to come, the Yetzer Tov to teach him, holding on to his heel, Esav goes astray. Esav becomes Yisrael Muma, and he fails to perform his partnership with Yaakov, to broaden. He wants to go off and be by himself, his small I. Let's understand Esav's essence, and let's delve deeper into those things that he said to fool his father. Whatever the Torah tells us is not merely, it's of the essence. Remember that he had a query. This is the way he fooled his father, that Esau fooled Yitzchak by asking him, how does one take Maisa from salt and straw? How do you take Maisa from salt and straw? Now we know the concept of Maisa is a person has to give a tenth of his produce. He has to tithe it, as they say in English. But salt and straw are things that normally one wouldn't consider to be tithable or needed tithing. What was he really asking? Let's try and understand the depth of this. And to understand this, we need to delve into something called taste. Taste. The sense of taste. People like to eat things because they taste good. It's true. On an intellectual level, probably we understand that if we don't eat, we'll die, but most of the time that's pretty far away from our thoughts. And taste is a very interesting thing, because if you've noticed, if you've had a slap-up meal and you're pretty full, in order to get a taste out of anything, you have to have something very, very sweet, very highly charged. A person who's starving, a person who's dying of thirst, give him water, the plainest possible thing, something that you only ever make a bracha on if you're really thirsty. Give this to him, and it'll be sweeter than the sweetest honey in the world. A person's taste is dependent on his situation, on And the answer is that the sense of taste is connected to the sense of life itself. The taste of life, the taste of food, the taste of things is connected to being alive. And when a person is on the edge of not being alive, the most basic things taste incredibly sweet because they give him the sensation of life. Let's understand, how can we understand this question of taking maisa from salt and straw? Salt gives taste. Salt is tam. Salt gives taste to things. Without salt, things do not have a taste. When the Yetzer Hara, or rather the Yetzer Hara which is guided by the Yetzer Tov, that's what gives taste to the world. The Yetzer Hara gives taste to the world. Why does a person do something? Because it's tasty. Because he has a desire for it. That's essential. That's an essential part of the world. Esau represented the Yetzer Hara, and he asked that question specifically because he wanted Yitzchak to think that he was motivated to positive ends. That was the trapping. He wanted to try and prove to Yitzchak that these two questions, we understand what straw is all about in a second. But seeing it's he, Esau, the Yetzer Hara, who's going to give all taste to food, taste in life. So therefore, if that's something which is significant, very significant, to give the desire, the Yetzer, to start, to give the taste to things, isn't that meaningful? Then also he is significant and he should be tithed. That was his message to Yitzchak Avinu, to try and prove that he was still on the derech, as they say. Now, the word tam, taste, has a double meaning. It means both taste and reason. In Hebrew, the word tam means taste and reason. And the answer is that, in a spiritual sense, so to speak, the more something has a reason, the more palatable the concept is. The physical taste of food makes it more palatable, and the reason for a concept, the deeper one's understanding of a reason for something, that makes the concept more palatable. And we can borrow these words also from cookery. Tam and toffel, there's a concept in making brachos, that something is the ikar, and there'll be the tafel, that which is subordinate, subsidiary. The same word is used, tiflus, which means senseless in the intellectual world, in the world of ideas. So the same parallel concepts work both in terms of the physical taste and the intellectual taste. The Yetzer Hara, has two purposes. First of all, it makes you cautious. It makes a person beware. The Yetzer Hara says, don't step out of the line. You see what's going to happen to you. It's ready to attack. And it's that very caution which lies at the root of all the mitzvahs lo saseh, the don't do commandments in the Torah. Don't do this or else. The Yetzer Hara cautions a person. And that is the idea of straw. Straw guards the wheat. It protects. It's the lo saseh. The Yetzer Hara has two jobs. One is for lo saseh, to protect you from transgressing. And the other one, as we said before, is the Yetzer Hara, which puts the taste into the mitzvahs aseh, which makes things taste sweet. Esau's trickery was that he knew specifically to ask these questions to make Yitzchak think that he had accepted his role of being the aliba denafshe, the beginning of all, and he accepted the servitude, the subservience to the Yetzer Tov, and he hadn't. He went off by himself. Die, din, just me. Okay, with this, we'll move now to the end. What's this got to do with Torah Shebaal Peh? And yet, Rabbi Akiva, as we said. What makes a person motivated to learn Gemara? It requires tremendous investment and sacrifice It's very, very difficult. You have to schwitz for many, many years, labor in darkness until suddenly the light appears. What drives a person, motivates a person to put in that kind of investment and sacrifice? The real reason is, as we said with everything, is the tam hatov. When a person finally understands something correctly, the simcha is unparalleled. That's the simcha of understanding which follows this great investment. It's the sweetest thing can be. Chadai nafshi, rejoice my soul. When a person starts off his career in learning, he understands things on a simple level. But the more he goes into it, the more he delves into it, that pleasure, that desire comes from the Yetzer Hara, the desire for pleasure. The more he becomes sophisticated, learned, wise, so that sophistication, that enlargement of his understanding gives him more and more pleasure. It expands the taste. There were two Yetzer Haras, one of which was banished from the world, and that was the Avodah Zarah, the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah. Nowadays, it's very impossible for us to understand Avodah Zarah. There's no taste in Avodah Zarah. There's no time in Avodah Zarah. If one can probably parallel it to our present-day experience, if one can imagine that nowadays the other Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hara for arayos, for relations, for physical, for sex, that is something which is very much with us. And we understand how strong and how illogical that really is. And my Rebbe always says, when your Yetzer Hara tells you to look at something you shouldn't be looking at in the street, do you really think you're going to see something new? Do you really think you're going to see something you haven't seen before? It's a Yetzer. It's illogical. And yet it drives a person. Now, if one can take that tremendous drive, that tremendous draw, attraction, which is still in place inside us, and apply that to Avodah Zarah, that was exactly the strength of Avodah Zarah, the attraction of Avodah Zarah. Again, something we can't understand. To us, it's ridiculous, to start bowing down to an oversized doll. But I promise you, at one point in history, doing that was as attractive as, if one could imagine a world where Avodah Zarah was still with us, then you'd have, ads for sports cars with these big dolls driving the car. Because Avodah Zarah, just like now they put some lady who should be wearing more clothes behind the wheel of a car. So we've got no concept of what this is. But that's gone. There's no lust for Avodah Zarah. What there is still the desire for arayos. The Zohar says that eventually the physical desire in the world will never be killed off, but it will assume its proper place, its appropriate place. Because the Ilmali Yetzer Hara, if it weren't for the Yetzer Hara, the Chedva said the Shmaita lo chavi. There would be no interesting desire for learning Torah. Torah Shel Baal Peh, on a deep level, is connected in some way with the desire of arayos. The Yetzer Hara is the root of Torah Shel Baal Peh. They're connected. The Vilna Gaon explains, and we'll finish with this, that there are two things which seem independent, but really are connected. And they're connected because they're two things that a person once had and he lost, and the desire for them is to get them back. And that's what makes them so powerful, so moshech. One of those is a wife, and the other is Torah. The first woman was created from man. It says that a man goes around looking for his lost object, his aveda. That sense of incompleteness that a person has without a wife is based on the fact that she was taken from him. Man instinctively feels lacking without a wife. And similarly, as we know, the Medrash says that when a baby is in the womb of an angel teaches him all of the Torah. He smacks him on the mouth before he comes out of the womb, and he forgets all the Torah. But it's the same thing. It's an aveda. I lost something. That is the most desirable thing in the world, when a person feels that he had something which he lost. That is the connection between Torah and Arias, physical desire. The desire for the wife and the desire for Torah are connected together. That chedvasa d'shmaisa, that sweetness, the desire for Torah, is connected inextricably with the desire for a wife, for connection in that way. As we said before, and we'll finish with this, the Torah obligates us to love Hashem b'chol levavcha. And how do we do that? And we'll sum up now what we're saying. A person doesn't do anything without a selfish motivation. Chadai nafshai, rejoice my soul. Lach karai, lach tanai, I learned for you. I learned Torah for you. All motivation starts off with the Yetzer Hara. All motivation starts off with me. All motivation starts off with the Yetzer Hara, with Eisov. The Yetzer Tov is that agent, is that essential ingredient that comes and grows as a person becomes more mature, older and wiser. Is to understand that desire, that the me that I thought was me is not me. That's the message of tonight. To kill the Yetzer Hara is impossible. Not only is it impossible, the world would not. As it says, the Chazal say at one point they took out the Yetzer Hara for Arias from the world for sexual relations, and after 3 days no chicken had laid an egg, and so they put it back. The world has to have that desire. But that desire, which is coupled, as we saw, together with Torah, and I'll come give you in a moment. That is the essence of Yitzchak, who began with the minimal and quintessential din. Yitzchak Avinu, remembers, ended up, and it says, Afara shel Yitzchak munach lefonov, that Yitzchak's, in some mystical way, the ashes of Yitzchak are in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. In some way, the Akedah actually happened. What does it mean, the ashes of Yitzchak? It means that Yitzchak took his eye and he sublimated it completely to something which was beyond this world. That is the ultimate of din. Self-abnegation to the point where my eye ceases to exist, separate from the entire creation, separate from Hashem. Complete hisbattlus to Hashem. He took his eye. He didn't deny his eye. He's made his eye into a universal. He expanded it to the point where he became, so to speak, inseparable from the Ribono Shel Olam. That's the midah of Yitzchak Avinu. That's the midah of din. That's what he bequeathed to Esau. That's what Esau should have done. Esau should have been that the eye which learns from Yaakov how big that eye really is. We'll end off with a gematria for those who are interested in these things. The word tzayid, we said at the beginning, tzayid b'piv, trapping. The gematria of tzayid is 104. Dalet is 4, Yud is 10, Tzadi is 90, 104. It's exactly half of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is 208. Kuf is 100, Ches is 8, Tzadi is 90, Yud is 10. Esau was the first half of Yitzchak. The half that should have joined together with his brother Yaakov. Esav's tzayid b'piv lies at the root of Torah Shebal Peh. That's the part Yitzchak saw. That's the reach b'piv, that pleasant aroma that he smelled, he sensed in his mouth, of Rabbi Akiva, of Torah Shebal Peh. As we said, Rabbi Akiva descended from Esau, and it was Rabbi Akiva who took the full power, the inspiration of the Yetzer Hara, which was Esau's, and he elevated it to the levels how far you could go, and joined it with the Yetzer Tov, and gave us the world of Torah Shebal Peh, the ultimate sweetness in the world. There is no tam, there's no taste like Torah. Anybody who's ever learned and really understood something well in Gemara, understand there is no sweetness in the world like that. one can find all of the tastes of the Yetzer Hara in the Torah. The Simcha of Torah, the Chedvasa Deshmaisa, which we talked about the Zohar leads to, contains every taste, every desire. The Yetzer Hara doesn't need to look elsewhere. Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Torah Tavlin. The Gemara in Kedushin says, a person is beset with many desires. Many of them are low desires. All of these desires can be sublimated, elevated. More than that, they can reach a point of satisfaction, of pleasure in learning of Torah, which is the ultimate fulfillment of the Yetzer Hara through his expression, through his learning from the Yetzer Torah, what that primeval desire, how big my I really is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us that through our amelis in Torah, our working hard in Torah, our breaking our heads in Torah, that we should be zoicher to that tremendous sweetness where we can say, Chadai nafshai, rejoice my soul. I learned for you. I learned karai lach, tanai lach.
Amen.